Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we are looking at one of the most fascinating stories of survival in human history. We're going to explore the overarching theme of Scottish military endurance and really their incredible symbolic defiance over centuries of conflict. This is a story about how a nation, one that was so often outnumbered and outgunned, managed to forge a completely unbreakable identity through sheer tactical ingenuity and the immense power of national icons. So, I want you to think about this for a second. How did a humble weed, and literally just a sprint across a battlefield, end up defining centuries of rebellion? It sounds almost absurd, right? But as you'll see, the items and actions you'd least expect, like a prickly wild plant and a chaotic mad dash, were transformed into the absolute most potent, enduring weapons of Scottish sovereignty. We're going to unpack exactly how physical survival on the battlefield directly translated into an indestructible cultural armor. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our structural roadmap for today. First, the asymmetric battlefield. 2, from the Schiltron to the Highland Charge. 3, icons of divine sovereignty. And finally, number 4, the Jacobite cultural weapon. Starting things off with Section 1, the asymmetric battlefield, the blueprint of resistance. So picture the core military problem the Scots faced for hundreds of years. It was stark. They were consistently going up against English armies that were numerically superior and way more technologically advanced, especially when it came to heavily armored elite cavalry. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you realize your survival relies entirely on cohesive infantry formations and brilliantly leveraging your own rugged geography. By utilizing bogs, narrow bridges, hills, and thick forests, they could strip away the advantages of their opponents and basically force engagements entirely on their own terms. Moving right along to Section 2, from the Schiltron to the Highland Charge, a tactical evolution. And this brilliantly illustrates that shift. Both of these legendary tactics require deep communal trust, often because the men fighting shoulder to shoulder were literal blood relatives. But wow, the tactical shift over 400 years is dramatic. Back in the 1300s, William Wallace and Robert the Bruce used the Schiltron. This was a defensive, incredibly dense hedgehog of 12-foot pikes designed specifically to disrupt the rhythm of heavy cavalry charges. Jump ahead to the 1700s, and we see the Highland Charge. Now, this was a highly aggressive shock tactic using wedge clusters and broadswords aimed at inducing sheer psychological terror right into the enemy lines. The actual mechanics of the Highland Charge were a terrifying yet highly choreographed sequence. It would kick off with a mad dash down a slope to build up massive momentum. Right at gunshot range, the Highlanders would drop to one knee, fire a single musket volley, and then purposefully use the resulting gun smoke as a visual screen. They drop their firearms entirely, draw a basket-hilted broadsword and a long dagger called a dark, and just sprint full tilt right through the smoke. The goal? To hack into the enemy lines before the opposing regular army could even reload or fix their clumsy plug bayonets. It completely wrong-footed standard British armies, mainly because it violated all the known rules of conventional warfare. But, every tactic eventually meets its counter. In 1746, at the Battle of Culloden, this fiercer charge was finally broken. The British government forces, under the Duke of Cumberland, adapted. They used brutal grape-shot artillery and, critically, a brand-new bayonet drill. Instead of stabbing at the man directly in front of them, whose targ shield would just block the blow anyway, soldiers were trained to stab to their exposed right side. This caught the charging Highlander right under his raised sword arm. It was a bloody, highly disciplined state military adaptation that permanently ended the dominance of the Highland Charge. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds from the battlefield to the ideological armor, icons of divine sovereignty. We literally cannot talk about Scotland without talking about the Thistle. Its legendary origins go all the way back to the 1263 Battle of Largs. As the legend goes, an invading Norse army was trying to sneak up on a sleeping Scottish encampment in the dead of night. To stay quiet, they took off their boots. Suddenly, one barefoot Norseman steps directly onto a spiny thistle and lets out this massive scream of pain. That woke up and completely saved the Scottish army. From that humble, prickly weed, it was cemented as a true emblem of royal authority. By 1470, King James III was stamping it on silver coins, and in 1687, King James VII formally established the incredibly prestigious Order of the Thistle. And directly associated with the Order of the Thistle is this phenomenal Latin motto, Nemo me impune lacessit, "No one provokes me with impunity." This brilliantly served as kind of a botanical warning label, It encapsulates Scotland's defensive nationalism perfectly. It's basically saying that while a thistle might just be a humble plant, its sharp spines defend the vibrant bloom right at its heart. It's a bold statement that beauty is not weakness and defense is absolutely not aggression. Right alongside the thistle, we have the saltire, or St. Andrew's cross. Now, this wasn't just a flag, it was a direct link to divine approval. By adopting the cross of one of the apostles, the Scots, including major figures like Wallace and Bruce, were appealing directly to the Pope for protection against English ecclesiastical claims to their territory. It framed their defense of the realm not just as some political struggle, but as a holy, divinely sanctioned crusade of a truly unconquerable nation. Bringing us to our final section, Part 4, the Jacobite cultural weapon, and weaponizing these symbols. To really grasp this, we first need to define Jacobitism. This was a political movement that aimed to restore the exiled Stuart monarchs to the thrones of Scotland, England, and Ireland. In Scotland particularly, Jacobitism became deeply, deeply intertwined with Scottish patriotism and a fierce opposition to the 1707 union with England. So, to legitimize their claim against the ruling Hanoverian government, the Jacobites needed to present themselves as the true, authentic inheritors of Scottish history. Now, what's really fascinating here is the deliberate cultivation of a Highlanderness within the Jacobite armies. Even though Highlanders made up the core of the military force, this identity became a huge rallying point for non-Highlanders too. The Jacobite leadership intentionally adopted the Highlander character because it clearly communicated martial virtue and an anti-union patriotism. The sword, in particular, took on immense cultural power as the ultimate symbol of a true, old-fashioned Scottish warrior fighting back against modern state corruption. So the crucial point we need to take away is that this wasn't just about military uniforms. It was the active construction of an ideal model of masculinity. Think of it like a highly effective 18th century brand identity. The Jacobite Highlander identity was built to symbolize intense physical exertion, traditional dress, and above all else, an unyielding, steadfast loyalty to the House of Stuart. By adopting this hyper-masculine ancient warrior persona, soldiers were actively rejecting the political realities of the British state and physically embodying this romanticized patriotic ideal. And these ancient symbols became absolute badges of authentic patriotism. Tartan wasn't just fabric. It became a dangerous political statement of opposition to the Union, worn even by Lowland and English Jacobites. The St. Andrew's cross was proudly flown on their standards. The thistle was worn, sometimes even secretly carved on jewelry or bowls, to signify Stuart legitimacy. And the Highland Charge itself, it was elevated from a mere battlefield tactic into a righteous, almost holy crusade against an illegitimate government. They co-opted literally every piece of ancient sovereignty to armor their political resistance. Which brings us to a rather profound conclusion and a final question I want you to think about. If the Highland Charge was broken at Culloden and the Jacobite rebellion was decisively crushed, how on earth does this identity survive so vibrantly today? It's fascinating to ponder how a physical defeat managed to completely immortalize the mythos of the Highlander, the tartan, and the thistle. It really proves that while armies can absolutely be destroyed on the battlefield, a carefully constructed, deeply rooted cultural symbol is practically invincible. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll see you next time.